My dad had his cop friend lock me up so my brother could pretend he was me. I cut them all off forever. Now, 2 years later, they're desperate for me to stop exposing them. Growing up, I wanted to be exactly like my older brother Paul, a chess warrior. You see, our family always valued intelligence over everything else. One time, my mom saw me running in our back garden. I was trying to be faster so I could be better at soccer during school games. If you ever come home one day with bad grades because you put time into sport, me and your father will be extremely disappointed, is something she always used to say. And Paul was always better at using his brain than any other part of his body. He could get all A's without even studying, and every teacher always praised him at the parent-teacher conferences for being gifted. So when he started playing chess, my parents loved him even more. To them, it was more brain food. Therefore, it was the only sport that was allowed. Ever since I was old enough to understand the world around me, I wanted to be just like him. Every night I would sneak into the living room and practice playing chess all by myself. I didn't even like it that much. I was just chasing this image I had of my parents surrounding me and finally realizing my worth, of Paul finally wanting to be my friend. And for years, it didn't happen. "We don't have time to drive you both to chess lessons," my mom would always say, whenever I begged them to let me be part of their world. But I kept going. I used YouTube videos to teach myself, borrowed books about chess from the school library. I was determined to win the love of my family. After a few years of me secretly becoming amazing at chess whilst maintaining a 3.8 GPA, it happened. My claim to fame, so to speak. "I've fallen out of love with chess," Paul said at the dinner table. His tone was casual, as if he was talking about the weather, but my ears were more open than that one mattress actress during the 1,000 men in 24 hours challenge. My mom looked like she was about to cry. "But honey, we've all worked so hard for this." My dad couldn't even speak, but Paul just avoided eye contact and focused on rolling his peas around with his fork. Adrenaline pumped through my veins. I started playing on chess.com and started playing all day and all night long, while pooping, showering, bus rides, everything. In just 2 weeks, I got up to 2,100. I still remember how I felt screenshotting it and sending it to my parents. Usually, they always ignored the texts I sent, but this time, they responded immediately. "Wow," my mom said, followed by love heart emojis. Meanwhile, my dad sent a thumbs up emoji, basically the fatherly equivalent of throwing a party. They started listening to me talk about my day during dinner. My mom was hugging me for the first time since I was a child. Their love was like a substance. I literally couldn't get enough of it. There was just one person who wasn't happy for me, and that was Paul. But it wasn't until I started playing on the school team and started winning competitions that he decided to say something. We were all in the living room when it happened. "Guys, I kinda miss chess, to be honest." To the naked eye, it may seem like a simple sentence, but I knew better. I could feel my heart breaking in my chest. "Really?" My mom turned around with a shining spark in her eye. My dad got up to pat him on the back and squeeze his hand. "I'll start training you right now. I knew you'd get back on it, son. Guys, are you still coming to my competition? Not everything is about you." My dad immediately cut me off. I quickly wiped the tears that came to my eyes. I was sound asleep at 3 a.m. when Paul unlocked my door from the outside and slammed it open. He started turning my room upside down, threw everything out of the drawers, took my clothes off the hangers. He was halfway through when I finally realized what was going on. "What the actual F are you doing? I need your chess equipment." The sound of his voice was desperate, and as I looked into his eyes, I noticed a flash of familiarity, because it was the one I always had when I was looking for our parents' validation too. I froze, because that's when the realization finally hit me. None of this was his fault. We were both after the same thing. That same day, while my entire house was quiet as they were out retraining Paul for his comeback, I decided I was done. Done feeling unloved and inferior over a stupid board game. So I grabbed everything I could that was related to chess in any way, even the medals and trophies we'd won. I threw them all into a plastic bag, drove into the woods, and set them on fire. Lol. It was a feeling that no amount of therapy could ever buy. Freedom. But when my parents got home, it's safe to say they didn't agree with what I had done. I thought they were just going to yell, maybe ground me. But no, those crazy efforts called the police. My mother's hand shook as she dialed, her voice trembling as she reported a disturbing incident involving her troubled child destroying valuable property and starting fires. My father stood beside her, nodding grimly, occasionally adding details that made the situation sound far worse than it was. Paul watched from the staircase, his expression a mixture of shock and something else, perhaps satisfaction. And just when I thought they couldn't do anything, they had me locked up. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The living room clock ticked loudly in the tense silence as we waited. My mother paced nervously, occasionally glancing out the window. My father sat rigidly in his armchair, refusing to look at me. Paul had disappeared upstairs after whispering something to our parents that I couldn't hear. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations and fear. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. Their patrol car pulled up with lights flashing but no siren, drawing curious looks from neighbors who happened to be outside. The officers, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a neatly trimmed mustache, approached our door with measured steps. My mother greeted them with visible relief, ushering them inside while throwing worried glances in my direction. Officer Brennan kept eyeing me like I was some kind of monster, while Officer Martinez seemed more confused than anything. Brennan was the taller one, with close-cropped gray hair and cold blue eyes that assessed me with immediate suspicion. His hand rested casually near his holster as he entered our living room, his gaze sweeping over me from head to toe. Martinez was younger, with kind brown eyes and a perpetual furrow between his brows, as if he was trying to solve a particularly difficult puzzle. When Martinez asked what had happened, my mom launched into dramatic sobs, claiming I'd been acting erratic for months, destroying family property, and burning things in the woods out of jealousy toward Paul. Her mascara ran down her cheeks as she described my increasingly concerning behavior. Apparently I'd been withdrawn, secretive, and showing signs of instability that had worried them for some time. She clutched a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking with what appeared to be genuine distress. I couldn't believe my ears. This version of events was so twisted, so far from reality, that I almost laughed in disbelief. The months of dedication to chess, the tournaments I'd won, my improved relationship with my parents, all rewritten as a disturbing obsession. My burning of my own chess equipment, a personal act of liberation, transformed into a dangerous, jealousy-driven destruction of family property. When I tried explaining I'd only burned my own chess stuff, my dad interrupted, claiming I'd been obsessed with fire lately and producing crumpled papers from my private notebook, but with disturbing additions scribbled between my normal entries. He pulled several pages from his pocket, unfolding them carefully, as if they contained evidence of something truly sinister. I recognized my handwriting on the pages, notes about chess strategies, tournament dates, occasional personal reflections, but interspersed between my words were disturbing additions I had never written, dark thoughts, violent imagery, concerning statements about Paul. I stared at him in disbelief, insisting someone had altered them. "That's not what I wrote," I protested, my voice rising with panic. "Someone added those parts. I never wrote anything like that." But my denials only seemed to confirm their narrative of my instability. My mother exchanged a meaningful glance with my father, who shook his head sadly, as if my delusions were exactly what they had been worried about. Officer Brennan took the papers with a concerned frown, and that's when I noticed how he and my dad kept exchanging familiar glances. There was a moment of recognition between them, a subtle nod that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been watching so carefully. Brennan's professional demeanor slipped slightly as he tilted his head toward my father. Mark Johnson? He asked, his stern expression softening slightly. Didn't recognize you at first. Soon they were reminiscing about playing on the same high school baseball team years ago. Centerfield, right? Brennan asked, a smile breaking through his official facade. Man, you could catch anything that came your way. My father laughed, momentarily forgetting the situation as he slipped into nostalgic camaraderie. And you had the best arm on the team, he replied, the tension in his shoulders easing visibly. They exchanged stories about championship games and former teammates, their body language relaxed and familiar. My stomach dropped as I realized they knew each other. This wasn't a coincidence. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications sank in. This wasn't a random police response. My father had specifically requested his old teammate, knowing he would be sympathetic to whatever story they wanted to tell. I looked desperately toward Officer Martinez, hoping he might notice the inappropriate familiarity, but he was busy examining the notebook pages. While they caught up, Officer Martinez examined the papers, avoiding my desperate attempts to catch his eye. He flipped through the pages with a professional detachment, occasionally glancing up at me with an unreadable expression. When I tried to move toward him to explain, Officer Brennan immediately stepped between us, his hand again moving to rest near his holster in a subtle warning. My mom continued her performance, painting me as unstable, paranoid about Paul, and now destructive. She described how I had always been jealous of Paul's natural abilities, how I had become obsessed with beating him at chess. According to her tearful account, when Paul decided to return to chess, I had snapped and begun acting out. She described finding small burnt items in my room, a complete fabrication, and noticing missing lighters and matches, another lie. Paul stood silently in the corner, looking uncomfortable but offering no defense. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly across his chest, eyes fixed on the floor. Occasionally, he would glance up, meeting my pleading gaze before quickly looking away. His silence spoke volumes, not actively participating in the lies, but not contradicting them either. When Officer Martinez directly asked him if he had noticed concerning behavior from me, Paul merely shrugged and mumbled something about me being different lately. Officer Brennan suggested taking me in for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation for my own safety, which my parents gratefully accepted, as if it was exactly what they'd hoped for. I think that would be best, my father said, relief evident in his voice. We've been worried about escalation, about what might happen next. My mother nodded vigorously, dabbing at her eyes with her now shredded tissue. We just want what's best for our child, she added, her voice breaking perfectly on the last word. My protests only made me sound more agitated. This is insane, I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. They're making this up. I only burned my own chest stuff because I was tired of being compared to Paul, but each word seemed to dig me deeper into the hole they had prepared. Officer Brennan exchanged knowing looks with my parents, as if my reaction was exactly what they had warned him about. Officer Martinez finally looked at me directly, but his eyes held only professional assessment, weighing my words against the evidence and the testimony of two concerned parents. They let me pack a small bag under supervision. Officer Martinez stood in my doorway, watching as I moved around my still disheveled room, gathering essentials. His presence was neither comforting nor threatening, simply watchful, doing his job. I picked out clothes mechanically, my movement slow and deliberate as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. My mom handed me essentials while whispering, this was for my own good. She appeared in the doorway with my toothbrush and toothpaste wrapped in a washcloth, her eyes still red-rimmed, but her composure mostly restored. As she pressed them into my hands, she leaned close, her voice low enough that Officer Martinez couldn't hear. This is to help you, she whispered, her fingers lingering on mine. Sometimes we need others to step in when we can't see our own problems. The absolute conviction in her voice was perhaps the most disturbing part. She truly believed the narrative they had created. Paul wouldn't meet my eyes as they led me out. He stood at the top of the stairs as the officers escorted me through the foyer, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched. For a moment, I thought I saw regret flash across his face, but it was quickly replaced by the blank mask he usually wore. As the front door closed behind us, I caught one last glimpse of my family, my mother leaning against my father, his arm around her shoulders, Paul still at the top of the stairs, watching but separate. I wondered if he felt guilty or just relieved to have the spotlight back. The cool evening air hit my face as the officers guided me toward their patrol car. The neighbors' curtains twitched as curious eyes watched the scene unfold, the quiet academic family's child being escorted into a police car. I could already imagine the gossip that would spread through our neighborhood by morning. The ride to the psychiatric facility was silent. Officer Martinez drove while Brennan sat in the passenger seat, occasionally speaking into his radio in low tones. I sat in the back, separated by a mesh partition, watching familiar streets pass by through the window. The world outside continued normally, people walking dogs, stopping at convenience stores, driving home from work, while my life had just been completely upended. I stared out the window, watching my neighborhood disappear, while Officer Brennan made a low call about doing Mark a favor. His voice was barely audible over the car's engine, but I caught phrases like old teammate and keeping it quiet and family situation. The casual way he discussed my fate as a favor to an old friend rather than a legitimate police action made my blood run cold. The intake process was humiliating. We arrived at a nondescript building with small windows and a secure entrance. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh after the dimness of the patrol car, making everything look slightly unreal, as if I had stepped onto a movie set. A security guard checked us in, and the officers handed over paperwork to a tired-looking woman at the front desk. They took anything potentially dangerous, shoelaces, belt, and a tired-eyed nurse questioned me, checking boxes as I answered. A male attendant led me to a small room where I was instructed to empty my pockets and remove my belt, shoelaces, and even the drawstring from my hoodie. Each item was placed in a plastic bag, labeled, and stored away. I felt increasingly vulnerable with each thing they took, as if they were systematically stripping away not just potential weapons, but pieces of my identity. When she asked about mood swings, and I mentioned my family gaslighting me, she murmured paranoid ideation to herself. The nurse, her name tag read Nancy, had dark circles under her eyes and chipped pink nail polish. She asked questions in a monotone voice, barely looking up from her clipboard as I answered. When I tried to explain the situation, how my parents had manipulated the truth, how they had called in a police officer who was friends with my father, her pen paused momentarily over the form before she wrote something and continued to the next question. My insistence that it wasn't paranoia if it was true only made her write more. It's not paranoia, I said, leaning forward in my chair. My dad literally knew the cop. They played baseball together in high school. They were laughing and reminiscing right in front of me. Nancy's expression didn't change as she made another note, then asked calmly if I often felt people were conspiring against me. Each attempt to explain my situation seemed to dig me deeper into the clinical hole they were creating for me. They put me in a sterile room with a bed bolted to the floor and a thick glass window overlooking the parking lot. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with pale blue walls and gray industrial carpet. The bed had a thin mattress covered in waterproof material that crinkled when I sat on it. There was a small bathroom attached with no door, just a half wall for minimal privacy. A camera in the corner of the ceiling blinked its red light continuously, watching my every move. I sat there trying to process how in less than 3 hours, I'd gone from burning chess pieces to being locked in a psychiatric ward. The reality of my situation crashed over me in waves. Just this morning, I had been a normal teenager making a symbolic gesture of independence. Now I was classified as mentally unstable, my words and actions pathologized, my reality dismissed as delusion. I lay back on the uncomfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how quickly everything had unraveled. The next morning, I met Dr. Lowell, a psychiatrist with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown. After a restless night of fitful sleep, interrupted by hourly checks from night staff, I was escorted to a small office where Dr. Lowell waited. He was a thin man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and a tweed jacket that seemed too warm for the season. He didn't stand when I entered, merely gestured to the chair across from his desk without looking up from the file he was reading. He had my file already filled with pages about my condition. The manila folder was surprisingly thick for someone who had been admitted less than 24 hours ago. He flipped through pages of notes, intake forms, and what appeared to be statements from my parents. Occasionally he would make a small sound or adjust his glasses as he read something particularly interesting. I sat uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, waiting for him to acknowledge me. When he mentioned my parents' concerns about my chess fixation and fire setting, I tried explaining the years of emotional neglect and conditional love. It wasn't like that at all, I said, leaning forward earnestly. Chess was the only way to get attention in my family. My brother was always the favorite, and when he quit chess and I got good at it, I finally got some recognition. Then when he wanted to come back to it, they completely forgot about me again. I only burned my own chess stuff as a way of letting go. But with each word, his expression grew more skeptical, noting my strong feelings about fairness and writing narcissistic tendencies on his pad. His pen moved continuously as I spoke, recording not my actual words, but his interpretation of them. When I mentioned the police officer knowing my father, he wrote paranoid ideation, the same phrase the intake nurse had used. When I described my parents' preference for Paul, he noted sibling rivalry and distorted perceptions of family dynamics. By the end of our session, I realized I was trapped in a nightmare where defending my reality only confirmed their suspicions of delusion. Every attempt to explain myself was twisted into evidence of my supposed condition. If I spoke calmly, I was suppressing rage. If I showed emotion, I was unstable. If I insisted on the truth, I was fixed in my delusions. There was no way to win. The system was designed to pathologize any response I might have. Dr. Lowell mentioned my 72-hour hold could be extended if necessary. He delivered this information casually, almost as an afterthought as our session ended. Of course, the initial hold is just for assessment, he said, closing my file and removing his glasses to clean them with a small cloth. If we determine you need more comprehensive treatment, we can extend your stay. The way he said it, not as a possibility, but as a likely outcome, sent a chill through me. In the common area, I observed other patients, some clearly struggling with serious issues, others seemingly normal. After my session with Dr. Lowell, I was led to a large room with worn couches, a TV mounted high on the wall behind protective plexiglass, and tables where some patients played board games or worked on puzzles. The fluorescent lighting gave everyone a sickly pallor, highlighting dark circles and pale complexions. Some patients rocked back and forth, muttering to themselves or staring vacantly at the walls. Others paced the perimeter of the room with determined energy, counting steps or following patterns only they could see. But many looked like ordinary people, teenagers scrolling through approved books, middle-aged men and women participating in group activities, young adults writing in journals or talking quietly with each other. A skinny boy with dark circles under his eyes introduced himself as Drew, revealing he'd been there 2 weeks, despite an initial 3-day hold. He approached me as I stood uncertainly near the entrance, unsure where to go or what to do. New kid, he said, not a question, but an observation. I'm Drew, been here 2 weeks. He had a nervous energy about him, his fingers constantly moving, tapping against his thigh or twisting the hem of his shirt. When I expressed shock that they could keep me longer, he explained that with parental consent, money or insurance, and a doctor's signature, they could extend stays indefinitely. 3 days is just what they tell you to get you in the door, he said with a bitter laugh. Once you're here, they can keep you as long as they want. All they need is your parents saying yes, insurance to keep paying, and a doctor checking some boxes on a form. He glanced around to make sure no staff were within earshot before adding, some kids have been here months. The longer you stay, the more they bill. When I told him my parents had set me up, instead of disbelief, he nodded knowingly, saying rich parents don't like inconvenient kids. Happens more than you'd think, he said with a shrug. Parents who don't want to deal with normal teenage stuff bring their kids here, tell the doctors whatever they need to hear, and boom, problem solved, out of sight, out of mind. His matter-of-fact tone suggested this wasn't shocking information to him, just the way the world worked. He slipped me a folded note before walking away, warning me not to read it there. His fingers brushed mine as he passed me, the small piece of paper transferring between us in a practiced motion. Not here, he muttered without looking at me. Cameras. He wandered away to join a group working on a jigsaw puzzle, leaving me holding the note and trying to appear casual. Later in the bathroom, I unfolded his message saying I wasn't crazy. He'd seen my file, they were lying, and to meet him in the TV room at 8. I locked myself in a bathroom stall, hands trembling slightly as I carefully unfolded the note. Drew's handwriting was small and precise, covering the tiny scrap of paper with information. You're not crazy. I work in records. Senior file. Parents lying. Staff knows. Meet TV room 8 p.m. when shift changes. Blind spot and cameras. That night, Drew whispered that my parents had told the facility I had a history of obsessive behavior, fire setting, and paranoia about my brother. We sat in adjacent chairs in the corner of the TV room, pretending to watch a rerun of a cooking show while speaking in hushed tones. The evening staff had just changed shifts, and the new attendants were busy getting updates at the nurse's station, leaving us momentarily less supervised. They came in with a whole story already prepared, Drew murmured, eyes fixed on the TV. Said you've been showing signs for months. Claimed you've been starting small fires around the house, becoming obsessed with your brother, writing disturbing things. He shook his head slightly. They even brought in notebook pages with weird stuff written on them, but you can tell some of the writing is different, added later. Working in the records room as his therapy job, he'd seen intake forms with prepared statements, and even a letter from my school counselor, whom I'd never even met. Drew explained that part of his treatment program included vocational therapy, which for him meant filing paperwork in the records room. They think I'm just alphabetizing and stuff, but I read everything, he said with a hint of pride. Your intake forms had all these statements already typed up, like they were prepared before you even got here. Most disturbing was the letter on school letterhead, supposedly from a counselor expressing concerns about my behavior. It said you'd been withdrawn, showing signs of aggression. The teachers were worried, Drew continued. But at the bottom, it mentioned you'd never actually met with the counselor directly. They based it all on reports from your parents. When I asked what to do, Drew firmly suggested documenting everything, which staff were decent, which just collected paychecks, every inconsistency in my treatment, and waiting for them to make a mistake. You need to play their game, he advised, his voice barely audible. Act compliant. compliant. Take the meds they give you, or pretend to. Don't argue with Dr. Lowell. He hates that. Just nod and say you're working on your issues. He glanced around before continuing. Meanwhile, document everything. Which nurses actually listen versus just report back. Which doctors spend more than 5 minutes with you. Every time your treatment changes without explanation. We need to build a case. Over the next days, I learned the facility's rhythm. The days followed a strict schedule. Morning medication at 7 o'clock, breakfast at 7:30, group therapy at 9 o'clock, individual sessions at various times, lunch at noon, structured activities in the afternoon, dinner at 5:30, evening free time, and lights out at 10. The routine never varied, creating a monotonous blur where one day melted into the next. I pretended to take morning meds, said just enough in group therapy to seem cooperative, endured individual sessions with Dr. Lowell where everything I said was twisted, and used free time to plan with Drew. I learned to hold the pills under my tongue until I could discreetly spit them into toilet paper, to nod and make appropriate eye contact during group sessions without revealing too much, to give Dr. Lowell just enough progress to seem compliant without actually buying into his narrative. I learned my parents had visited, not me, but Dr. Lowell, bringing more evidence of my instability, out-of-context texts, old creative writing assignments with dark themes, and concerns about my obsession with winning. Drew discovered this after finding notes from their meeting in my file. They brought a bunch of stuff, he told me during our now regular evening conversations. Old text messages where you sounded upset about something, some story you wrote for English class that had dark themes, more about your unhealthy competitiveness with your brother. Meanwhile, Drew helped document everything, which nurses actually listened versus reported to Dr. Lowell when my medication increased after my parents' visit despite no concerning behaviors. We created a coded system in a journal I was allowed to keep as part of my therapy. I would write seemingly innocent entries about my day, but certain words and phrases documented important information, which staff members were present during incidents, exact times and dates of medication changes, inconsistencies in what I was told by different staff members. A week into my stay, a new patient named Vanessa recognized me from chess tournaments. She arrived during lunch, escorted by a nurse to our table after going through the same intake process I had experienced. As she sat down with her tray, her eyes widened in recognition. "Hey, I know you," she said, pointing her fork in my direction. "You're the chess whiz from Westlake High, right? I saw you destroy everyone at the regional finals last month." When I asked about school, she revealed Paul had returned, telling everyone I'd had a breakdown from pressure. "It's weird," she said, lowering her voice and leaning closer. "He's been telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown from the pressure of competitions. Says you couldn't handle it and had to take some time away." She frowned, pushing her food around her plate. "But that doesn't make sense because you always seem so calm at tournaments." Worse, he was wearing my medals, claiming he'd trained me and was making his comeback. "He showed up wearing your medals," Vanessa continued, her expression confused. "Like the actual ones you won. I remember the special one from the state championship with the blue ribbon. You were so proud of it. Now he's wearing it, telling everyone he was your trainer and is making his big comeback." She added that people noticed him using my exact strategies in online tournaments, and in the background of a celebration video was a notebook with my handwriting. He was literally stealing my chess identity. "Some people in the chess club were talking about it," she said. "He's playing online using the exact same openings and strategies you're known for. And someone noticed in this video his parents posted of him practicing at home. There was a notebook open on the table with what looked like your handwriting. The diagrams and notes you always make with those little stars next to important moves. That night, I couldn't sleep, consumed by thoughts of Paul wearing my medals, using my moves, telling my stories, all enabled by my parents. The unfairness burned in my chest. I lay awake on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling as the night attendant made hourly checks, shining a flashlight briefly into my room to ensure I was still there. The knowledge that Paul was not only free, but actively stealing my identity while I was locked away was almost too much to bear. The injustice of it all made my chest physically ache, as if something heavy was pressing down on me. The next morning, Drew excitedly showed me printouts of emails between Dr. Lowell and my parents that he'd accessed when a night nurse left her station unlocked. He caught me at breakfast, sliding into the seat beside me with unusual energy. "Got something," he whispered, his knee bouncing nervously under the table. Night nurse Jenkins left to deal with a patient freaking out. Her computer was still logged in. I printed these and hid them in the ceiling tile in the supply closet. During our afternoon free time, he retrieved the folded papers from his hiding place and showed me in the bathroom, away from cameras. The emails were formal but revealing. Dr. Lowell updating my parents on my treatment resistance and continued fixation on perceived family injustices. My parents' responses expressed concern about my slow progress and asked about extending my stay. One email from my mom expressed concern about my continued fixation on chess and brother and asked about extending my stay to give Paul more time to prepare for the upcoming tournament. "We're concerned about releasing patient before Paul's important tournament," my mother had written. "Given the history of jealousy and acting out, we feel it would be better for everyone if patient remained under supervision until after the event on the 15th. Is this something we can arrange?" It was undeniable evidence they wanted me out of the way while Paul took over my life. Dr. Lowell's response was equally damning. "I share your concerns about premature discharge. Given the patient's focus on chess and sibling rivalry as triggers for previous incidents, I agree it would be prudent to maintain the current treatment plan through the date you mentioned. We can reassess after the tournament, but we knew it wasn't enough. Who would believe two unstable teenagers over respected adults? It's their word against ours," Drew said, carefully folding the emails and returning them to their hiding place. "To everyone else, we're just crazy kids making things up. We need something more concrete, something they can't dismiss." The next day, I tried a new approach with Dr. Lowell. Instead of defending myself, I played along, admitting maybe he was right about my fixation on fairness and jealousy of Paul's natural gifts. I sat in his office, hands folded in my lap, expression appropriately contrite. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my voice carefully modulated to sound sincere but not overly dramatic. "Maybe you're right about some things. I do get really focused on what seems fair or unfair." I expressed regret about burning the chess items, watching as he wrote showing insight on his pad. "The chess stuff, burning it was probably not the best way to handle my feelings," I continued, looking down at my hands as if ashamed. "I was just so frustrated, but I can see now how that might have scared my parents." Dr. Lowell nodded encouragingly, his pen moving rapidly across his notepad as he documented my apparent breakthrough. Over the following days, I became the model patient, enthusiastically participating in group therapy, discussing my jealousy issues and need for attention, apologizing for worrying my parents, and expressing desire to make amends. In group sessions, I shared carefully crafted insights about my issues, volunteering to go first and thanking others for their feedback. During activity time, I helped other patients with art projects and offered to clean up afterward, earning approving nods from the staff. Dr. Lowell was impressed with my progress. The nurses reported my improved attitude, and even my parents seemed cautiously optimistic during a brief phone call. They were too busy to visit. "You sound much better," my mother said during our monitored phone conversation. "Dr. Lowell says you're finally acknowledging some of your issues." My father added that they were proud of my progress, but thought it was best to continue treatment a bit longer. Neither mentioned Paul or the upcoming tournament. Behind Behind this compliant facade, Drew and I continued planning. We identified the most sympathetic staff member, a young nurse named Ellie who seemed skeptical of Dr. Lowell's methods. Ellie was new, just a few months into the job, and still approached patients with genuine compassion rather than clinical detachment. She would actually listen during our brief interactions, maintaining eye contact and asking follow-up questions that suggested she was really hearing us. We collected evidence of inconsistencies in my treatment. Drew continued accessing records when possible, noting medication changes that coincided with my parents' communications rather than any change in my behavior. I documented conversations with different staff members who gave contradicting information about my treatment plan and discharge date. We carefully hid our notes in various locations, taped under furniture, slipped into the spine of books in the common area, hidden in Drew's secret ceiling tile spot. Most importantly, we learned that in 3 days, I would be transferred to a less secure adolescent facility for transition back to normal life, something my parents didn't yet know. Drew overheard a conversation between Dr. Lowell and the facility director discussing bed availability and transfers. My name was on the list for Oakwood Center, a step-down facility with more freedoms and a focus on reintegration into normal life. They thought I was safely locked away while Paul prepared for the tournament I had qualified for through months of competition. According to the calendar in the common room, the tournament was still a week away. Plenty of time for Paul to continue practicing my strategies, wearing my medals, and telling everyone he had been my mentor rather than the other way around. On my last night in the acute facility, Drew gave me his cousin's phone number, explaining he'd helped Drew get out before, and I could call from the new place where I'd have phone privileges. My cousin Marcus works with a patient's rights group, Drew explained, scribbling the number on a scrap of paper torn from his journal. He knows how these places operate, how they keep kids longer than necessary for insurance money, how they medicate first and ask questions later. He can help you once you're at Oakwood. I hugged this unexpected ally, promising to help him too once I was out. The embrace was awkward. Neither of us were particularly physical people, but sincere. In the short time we'd known each other, we'd formed a bond based on mutual understanding and shared injustice. I felt a responsibility not just to free myself, but to somehow help Drew too. Drew smiled sadly, asking only that I expose them and show the world what they do to kids like us. Just don't forget about this place once you're out, he said, his usual nervous energy momentarily subdued. People need to know what happens here, how they take normal kids with normal problems and turn them into patients, how they believe parents over children every time, how they medicate instead of listen. The next morning, packing my few belongings for transfer, I felt a strange mix of hope and determination. I carefully folded the clothes my mother had packed for me, tucking Drew's cousin's phone number into the hem of my t-shirt where it wouldn't be found during searches. The small journal I'd been keeping, full of coded entries documenting my treatment, was hidden among the pages of an approved self-help book I'd been given in therapy. I wasn't broken or crazy, and I wouldn't let them erase me. Despite everything, the medication they'd tried to give me, the therapy sessions designed to make me doubt my own reality, the constant surveillance and pathologizing of normal emotions, I still knew who I was. I still remembered the truth, and most importantly, I still had a plan. Looking out the window at the van waiting to take me to my next destination, I knew it wasn't freedom yet, but it was one step closer. The white van with Oakwood Center printed on its side waited in the circular driveway, a driver in scrubs leaning against it while smoking a cigarette. It wasn't exactly an escape vehicle, but it represented movement, progress, one step closer to regaining control of my life. Once out, I would reclaim my story, not just for me, but for Drew and all others whose truths had been buried under convenient diagnoses and parental narratives. This wasn't just about chess anymore, or even about Paul and my parents. It was about a system that allowed parents to institutionalize inconvenient children, that valued adult narratives over adolescent experiences, that pathologized normal teenage emotions and behaviors for profit. Paul could have the chess pieces and medals, but not my identity, and our parents couldn't hide the truth forever. The realization was liberating. Chess had never been what I truly wanted anyway. It had only been a means to an end, a way to gain the approval and attention I craved. Now I had a new purpose, one that felt more authentic and important than winning tournaments ever had. As they escorted me to the van, I felt lighter somehow. The anger remained, but had transformed into something more powerful. Resolve. I would expose the lies through truth, not destruction. No more burning chess pieces in the woods or lashing out in ways that could be used against me. Instead, I would document, record, and reveal, methodically and irrefutably. The van doors closed behind me, and I watched the facility shrink in the rearview mirror. The bored-looking driver muttered our destination was about 40 minutes away. I nodded, settling back into the seat, feeling the bumps in the road as we pulled onto the highway. 40 minutes closer to freedom. 40 minutes closer to justice. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already planning my next move, one that neither Paul nor my parents would see coming. Unlike chess, where all the pieces are visible and the rules are clear, this game had hidden players and changing rules. But I was learning quickly, adapting my strategy, thinking several moves ahead. And this time, I wouldn't be playing for their approval. I'd be playing for my truth.